Overnight strikes in the Dnipropetrovsk region of central Ukraine killed 13, leaving 11 others injured. According to the Ukrainian authorities, 5 of them are reported to be in a serious condition. Most of the casualties were reported from the Marganets town, which is across the Dnipro River from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine claiming that the rockets were fired from a captured nuclear power plant in Dnipropetrovsk. After the attacks, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Kiev will respond to the Russian shelling. He further urged his allies to support the war-torn country with more weapons.
Збройні сили України, наша розвідка, наші правоохоронні органи не залишать без відповіді сьогоднішні російські обстріли Дніпропетровщини. Завтра в Копенгагені починає роботу конференція на рівні міністрів оборони держав-партнерів України. Буде обговорюватись подальша підтримка нашої держави у цій війні, зокрема зброєю. Я вдячний усім нашим партнерам, які розуміють, що тільки забезпеченням програшу Росії на полі бою, тільки російськими втратами, військовими, політичними, економічними, можна наблизити повернення безпеки для України і для всієї Європи. Чим більше зброї отримує Україна, чим більше військово-технічної і фінансової підтримки, тим швидше і наші люди, і всі європейці знову зможуть відчути спокій і стабільність життя.
Meanwhile, another woman died in the Zaporizhzhia region after Russian missiles slammed into a village on Wednesday morning, taking the total number of casualties to 14. The regional council head has said that the strikes had hit a local power line, leaving thousands of people without electricity. Russia and Ukraine have been trading charges, accusing each other of shelling around the Zaporizhzhia plant, which has 6 reactors. The tensions have revived memories of the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster that killed hundreds of people and spread radioactive contamination over much of Europe. And with a nuclear disaster looming large, the group of 7 industrialized nations condemned Russia's occupation of the power plant and called on Moscow to immediately hand back full control. In a statement, the G7 foreign ministers had said that the Ukrainian staff operating at the plant must be able to work without threats, and Russia's control of the plant endangers the region. The UN Security Council also has expressed its concerns. The Council will hold an emergency meeting today to address the crisis at the nuclear plant. The UN Nuclear Safety Watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency's Director General, would brief the Security Council meeting. The strikes came a day after major blasts at the Crimea airfield that killed 1. Moscow had insisted that the explosions were caused by detonating ammunition rather than Ukrainian fire. And with me on the broadcast this minute is our correspondent Rosie Butchard, joining us live from Brussels. Rosie, help us better understand the reactions that you have been tracking at this point and the concerns that have been on the rise over this nuclear power plant.
Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been addressing more than a dozen defense ministers from various European countries, also from the United States and Canada, just in the past few hours. And he's been trying to get across what he feels is the scale of the danger here. Now, he reminded those defense ministers that Zaporizhzhia, the nuclear power plant in question, is the biggest facility of its type in Europe, and he said the third biggest facility by size in the entire world. And he also evoked dreadful memories of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which of course also took place in Ukraine. So he was making a reference to history there to try and get across, as I said, what he feels is really the gravity of the situation at hand here. Now, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant has been under Russian control since around about the start of the war, but Ukrainian staff continue to work here. Now, the G7 foreign ministers, so that's this group of 7 foreign ministers, have released a statement urging Russia to hand back control of that nuclear site to Ukraine. Let me read you some of that statement. So G7 ministers say Ukrainian personnel responsible for the operation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant must be able to carry out their duties without threats or pressure. And they go on to say that it's Russia's continued domination of the nuclear power plant that endangers the region. Now, the boss of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, has spoken about this in the past, and he referred to at that point some fighting that happened near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant early on in the war, so separate to these most recent strikes. And even at that time, he said fighting happening in the vicinity of this kind of facility is simply unthinkable when it comes to the danger that that could entail. He's due to brief the United Nations Security Council later today. That is, in fact, at Russia's request.
Right, let's, Rosie, also talk about the extent to which these statements and these this statement also coming from the G7 foreign ministers saying that the Ukrainian staff operating at the plant must be able to work without threats, and the rhetoric that we've seen coming in once again. But to what extent can all of this actually translate into things changing on the ground?
Well, this is the big question facing G7 leaders, European Union leaders, NATO leaders, all of those political figures which come here so often to Brussels to try and work out their next move on this geopolitical chessboard. Of course, they've tried sanctioning Moscow. They've been trying to cripple the Kremlin's ability to finance its war, to isolate Russia internationally. And particularly on that point on sanctions, there's been a lot of questions here in Brussels over the last few weeks, with even some EU leaders, for example, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, raising questions as to whether they are working when it comes to moving the needle on the ground and on the battlefield. Now, the European Union is insisting that its actions are having an impact on Moscow, and as we speak, a group of defence ministers are meeting in Copenhagen to talk about supplying Ukraine with more weapons, and that will include training up Ukrainian soldiers to transition from Soviet-era arms toward more modern-era weapons. That, they say, to try and indeed change Ukrainian forces' chances on the battlefield as they continue to fend off Russian attacks. And of course, as we enter, really many people are saying, a new phase of this conflict months into it. There are some discussions here in Brussels also about whether the EU itself should sanction imports of nuclear power from Russia. That's so far been not on the EU's agenda. They have sanctioned until now coal imports, some imports of oil. Gas has remained untouched, so has nuclear. That's a question EU leaders will have to discuss. Right now, it's the middle of the summer here in Europe. They're on a break. They haven't been meeting for summits as they would usually do so regularly, but it's certainly a question that will definitely come up and be high on their agenda, and one which they will have to discuss and decide upon when they meet again in September.
Rosie, we'll leave you there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.